Okay, I think we'll get started since it's just about 6:30. Welcome. I thank you all for coming out and appreciate your interest in our fantastic West Pittston Library. I am Mary Portelli from the West Pittston Historical Society, for those of you who don't know me. Over the years, whenever there has been an anniversary for the library, someone has always done a history, and I went through all of those, but I still wanted to know more. So I've tried to really dig deep and find some things that we haven't talked about in the past, and we'll see how we do here. In 1873, exactly 150 years ago, West Pittston had some homes. It wasn't totally populated. The concentration of homes was in the area, kind of around the Montgomery Avenue School. That was the original West Pittston Land Association lots. The area beyond Delaware Avenue South, there were very few homes at that time. So that's where the concentration was. But the community at that point was focusing on building a town. They were working on sewers, they were working on sidewalks, putting in curbs, all kinds of infrastructure. But they were also thinking about churches and parks and some of these other things. And here it is, 1873, September 11th, in the Pittston Gazette, which was the primary newspaper in Pittston at that time. They're talking about sites for churches, schools, and a public library will all be needed in time as the place becomes more densely populated. And we're pleased to call the Garden of Luzerne. Well, that's a whole other program, because there was a part of town that was going to be called Luzerne at one time. We'll talk about that another day. But basically, they were trying to come up with the idea of a library. And just a few weeks later, or a week later, on September 18th, a group of residents gathered together, and they came up with a library charter. September 18th, 1873 was the meeting, but that was the date of the newspaper article. But on November 10th was when the charter was drafted. Attorneys George Ferris, that man up there in the painting, and Frank Mosier, who was also a resident. Most of these gentlemen lived in West Pittston, but they had businesses in Pittston. The communities were very closely related at that point. The business people all, for the most part, lived in West Pittston, and their stores and whatnot were in Pittston. So the Pittston Library Association became chartered. And you're thinking, well, why is it Pittston and not West Pittston? Well, at the time, it was the Pitstons, not so much West Pittston or Pittston, even though they were two separate communities. But because, as I said, we had people living in West Pittston but working in Pittston, and people were crossing the bridges constantly to go back and forth to work. It was considered a group community. So that's why still today, the library's charter is under the Pittston Library Association. They sold stock subscriptions at $10 each. At this meeting in October, they were suggesting possible books for the library. And the first library was actually in Pittston. Now, this view, some of you old timers might remember this. For those of you that are new or younger, this is Water Street right here, coming off of the Water Street Bridge, the iron bridge that you can't cross anymore. And this is the Baptist church that is still there. All of this is gone. That's gone. That's where that little coffee shop is up there. And this was a post office in Pittston, right in this building, and that is where the library had two shelves, and the librarian was the postmaster. So he was the one that was in charge. So they had two shelves of books. How exciting. Yes?
Question.
Yes.
The bridges weren't built until 1912.
There was a bridge there before that.
Oh, there was a
Mhm.
bridge? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, there
Thank
was a
you.
bridge, we'll talk about that. Yeah, there was a bridge there before that. But they had 2 shelves of books. Over the next 25 years, the subscriptions dropped. People were not paying up their $10 a year. The number of board members dropped from 9 to 5, so interest was really not there. And in 1887, the board didn't even meet. So now we're having some problems. So by 1897, the few board members that were left felt that there was a need to expand, that people weren't quite getting the message. So they decided to have a reading membership that was less expensive, $3 a year, and you could just take out books and read. They rented a new room at the Miners Bank building, which is, this is probably a 1910 view. That's the current Landmark Bank building. And they hired a librarian. Elizabeth McMillan was hired to staff that new library. By now they have 1,000 books. So they're moving along. However, things still weren't going so well. The new expansion it quickly put them in the red. They didn't have the funds to pay the librarian and the rent. So now they're struggling. So at this point, the decision was made to move the library to West Pittston. I'm going to give you some information on that in my next slide, why they actually decided to do that. Because about 3 years later, there was an article written that kind of spelled it all out. But they made the decision to move to West Pittston, and the Bruin Block building, intersection of Wyoming Avenue and Exeter Avenue, approximately between where Smith's Tire is and the Jenkins Bridge. Kind of in there, that was this little strip of stores, wooden stores. And the library moved into this building right here. In fact, that sign says the Pittston Library Association. So we're now at the turn of the century. There's a lot more people living in West Pittston than there had been. A lot more homes. You can see this is a map image of that. Here's a front view of that building. Again, the library building, and that's kind of where it is compared to where this is that intersection of Exeter, Susquehanna, and Wyoming Avenue here. Two years after that move, in 1901, Reverend Harshaw, who was the first pastor at our church right across the street, the Presbyterian Church, Reverend Harshaw wrote an article for Outlook magazine. He did not specify what towns he was writing about, but he was writing about how this community came together and their journey towards building a library. And he made no bones about the fact that there were 4 things that were necessary. Total support of the community, an appropriately selected building that was bright and cheery, well lit, filled with everything necessary to a well-equipped institution. Now this is in a national magazine. A library club of young ladies thoroughly interested in literature, who open the rooms and make sure everything is in order. And then finally, an expanding and interested group of patrons. The article in the newspaper about this goes on to say that he felt that moving the project across the river to West Pittston and include only West Pittston contributed to the success. A lot of the people in Pittston at that time were our immigrant ancestors who didn't necessarily speak or read English, including my own. And I think he felt that coming to West Pittston provided a better audience, perhaps, for the library. So this was what his take on the situation was. He was instrumental, Dr. Harshaw was instrumental in the formation of this library and bringing it over to West Pittston. And I believe the library today, Ms. Kendra, we do still have the Harshaw Society?
Yes.
Okay, and that's like for some major contributors or something, I believe, yes. Early 20th century, in 1902, the library closed due to smallpox in the area for 2 months. In 1907, the borough celebrated their Golden Jubilee 50th anniversary, and all the money that they raised from that, there were some funds left over, so $250 was donated to the library for books. An annual stipend became something that the board started to discuss. We want the borough to give us some money. So after coaxing the borough for a number of years, by 1915, the borough started saying, okay, we'll give you $200 a year, which I think was probably a pretty good contribution at that point. The library still doesn't have a permanent librarian in 1914, but they could hire one for $30 a month. And her duties would include care of the fires. But so I guess that must have been either the potbelly stove or the coal furnace. Finances began to improve. People were coming to the library, people were taking out subscriptions, so things were looking up, plus they were getting that money from the borough, which I'm sure helped. Library finances are improving. And a committee from the West Pittston Women's Club started a fund to purchase a permanent library building. The West Pittston Women's Club has always been very instrumental in the development of this institution. The West Pittston Women's Club was formed in 1918, I believe, so they were a very new group at that point. But it was there at their urging that the library was starting to think, okay, maybe we need our own building that we are purchasing. Now, at this time, the other thing that was happening in town is that they were preparing to build the Fort Jenkins Bridge, okay? So that construction on that actually started in 1924, but they were getting everything in place, everything in order. And the bridge contractor thought, we need an office where we can hang out and have all of our plans and do our work. So they were eyeing up that little building right next to where the bridge is. And they decided, okay, we want this building. So since the library was only renting, they were going to have to eventually move out. So they knew that this was coming. So they figured this was an opportune time to begin looking for a location. This is actually the interior of that building once the contractor moved into it. So this was the interior of the library as it looked in West Pittston, right after the contract, because this is like August of 1924, so it's not too long after the contractor went in there. And I'm seeing all these posters and things that probably don't have anything to do with the bridge, so I'm guessing they're things that were left over from when the library occupied the building. So now they're looking at this building. It's had several names, the Ferguson Building, the A.B. Brown Building, based on some of the original owners. This particular building was constructed as a cabinet shop. And this is a view of it from that way, looking towards, so this is Exeter Avenue and Warren Street would be like right down here. This is a 1907 view, and you can see it doesn't have the wing that we are now sitting in. It's just this front part and then a little one-story kind of a porch back here. It was a cabinet shop. By 1909, it was a grocery store. There was a fire in here that was set by a burglar who was trying to break in, and the family that owned the grocery store was living upstairs on the second floor, because as you can see, it was 2 stories at one time. And the burglar set the building on fire trying to smoke out the grocer and nearly killed that family and their children. But fortunately they escaped. The library knew they wanted this building, but the purchase was put on hold for a while due to the construction of the new American Legion building. Now, the American Legion building is on Linden Street, and the Women's Club felt that all of the money that people were donating in the community should be focused. And they felt that the bridge wasn't going to happen for a couple more years. They still had a little bit of time. Let's put all the contributions into the American Legion building, because that was going to be not only for the Legion, it was going to be for the Boy Scouts. And if you look at the inscription on the top, it says Boy Scouts. It was also considered a possible location to include the library and the Women's Club. All the community groups were going to be in that building. So they eventually built the building, the Legion building, the John D. Stark American Legion building. And then they came back here now and decided it's time for this to become a reality. And again, just the purchase was greatly supported by the West Pittston Women's Club. They did a lot of the fundraising. They had a considerable amount of money in their treasury, donated much of it to the cause of purchasing this building. So the library officially moved in here in 1924. Now, this is how the building looked. This is probably like a late 1950s view, but you can still see how it had the 2 stories. And it was the original brick look. It wasn't painted at that point. The board loved the idea of new construction, but they didn't feel that they could do it, so they felt that this was the best way to go. They had a donor who was going to contribute $5,000 towards that. So the library moved into this building and did a lot of fundraising over the next several decades. And these are some of the fun things that they did. By now we have a junior women's club as well. So they were also supporting women's club. They, in this article, from 1938, they were doing a cabaret dinner. Eventually, they started having an annual Wednesday night before Thanksgiving dinner dance. And that went on for a long time. Probably 20 years or more, they would sponsor that. The youth center, the high school youth center, many of you attended youth center as a kid. Youth center was raising money for the library. They were putting on plays to support the library. This was 1959. Fashion shows. Okay, the Junior Women's Club was having fashion shows for the library in the 50s. The drama league, West Pittston had a drama league, and they were doing plays as well. So you can really see how the community was wholeheartedly into the whole idea of supporting the library. So the library was thriving at that point.
Still referred to as Pittston Library?
Well, the charter says that.
Yes.
Yes, the charter says Pittston Library Association. We call it the West Pittston Library, but the charter is written, yes, the Pittston Library. The borough stipend has now increased to $500, so they're getting a lot more money from the borough. And in 1958, the library received $1,000 left from the centennial celebration, so that also helped. Now, in 1957, Cornelia Ferris of Dunmore dies. She is the wife and the daughter, well, she's the daughter-in-law of George S. Ferris. Here he is here, that man up there. Cornelia Ferris's husband, Edwin, died about 10 years earlier. And in his will, he left a codicil that said, when my wife dies, I want this amount of money to be donated to the West Pittston Library. It was about $25,000. So the late 40s, the library knew that one day they were going to have this amount of money coming their way. So that was good for them to know this in advance. So people could start thinking, what are we gonna do with this? So in 1957, Mrs. Ferris passes away, and this was in April, yes, April 1957. It was actually 28,000, not 25,000. So they decide they're going to put this wing on. So there was discussion, what should it look like, how should it be? Architect Ettore Lippi was brought in to be the architect. The main thing that they were doing to this building that caused some grief within the community was removing the second story of the building. And there isn't a lot written about this, but I remember personally, I was a young girl, but I remember my mom discussing this, and you know, there were some people that were in favor of it, other people no. I'm not sure why they felt it was important to take the second story off. But, and I know you talk to Kendra or any of the others, they wish they still had it today. And in light of the flooding, you know, it really would have come in handy. However, it happened, and here we are. So the contractor was Walter Schmaltz, and they took the second story off. They built this room, had all the brick repointed, and then they finally painted it white. They decided it would be that white color, and now there's a new heating plant added to the building as well. So the groundbreaking for that was in 1960. And the library had to close, by the way, for a short time while they were doing that. This is a picture of the Key Club, the West Pittston High School Key Club, and they are doing some yard work here around the building after the construction was finished. They were laying a new, seeding the lawn, and you can see the building hasn't been painted yet. But they brought in the guys to come in and plant some things and put in a new lawn.
What year was that, Mary?
Well, I would say it would be if they did construction in 60, I would say it's 61, 62. You know some people in there?
What year was it?
I'm thinking it's around 1961, 1962. Oh, maybe it's Tom's father. Is that Tom's father? Oh, it's Leon. Yes. Which one is Leon?
On the end over here.
On the right.
Yeah.
This guy, yeah,
right.
Leon
That
just
looks
passed
like,
away.
That looks like
It
Leon.
probably is. What do you
Harold Patience.
Huh?
I believe I see Harold Patience.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, they're people that a lot of you might recognize. You know, I will put this on our Facebook page, and maybe somebody can identify people.
That's a good idea. That's a good idea.
But the building wasn't completely finished yet, but they wanted to get the grass in, I suppose.
Are these high school kids?
Yeah, this was the West Pittston High School Key Club. Mhm. I'll pull it up later. Maybe you can identify some people for me. So here's the Ferris Room as it looked when it opened in 1961. And all of these lovely tables and chairs were lost in the last flood. But they had a grand opening, and I believe it was a 2-day affair. It was a full weekend. They were open from, 10 in the morning till 8 at night. People could come in and look at the room. And then over here we have an article about Dan Flood presenting a flag, an American flag, to the newly restored library. And that's Jerry Weisberger, for those of you that are looking, and Jared Jennings, who were both, I believe, were both on the board at the time, the library board. George Weisberger on the left and Jared Jennings on the right. They were both on the board. And some nice interior views of the library as it first looked. This is the Ferris Room back here. So right here at this corner is where that desk used to be.
Yep.
And many of you will remember that. This was the board room where the board would meet. And basically, at this point now, they're focusing on members and fundraising, just really trying to beef up the number of people that are using the library. They're contacting town businesses and even former members to say, hey, can you come back, maybe take out a membership or get a library card. They were even doing, Women's Club was helping them with house-to-house canvassing, trying to get donations and bring people back in. So now you can get a good view, you can kind of compare how the old library looked to the current building. So 1907, about 1955, and more current view. 1972 was the first flood that has been documented here. I'm sure in 1936 when there was flooding, the basement probably got some water. At this time, in 1972 during Hurricane Agnes, they got 18 inches of water on this first floor. Apparently not enough to ruin that furniture because it was still here for a while. But they said it was $50,000 worth of damage, and the library was closed for 2 months. And donations were down because a lot of people in town needed to work on their homes. They didn't have the money to put forth or the time. But the library was completely restored by 1976 for the nation's bicentennial. And at this point, they have added a second adult reading room next door. And this one is dedicated to Elsie Foster Ellis, who was a grand old woman in town. She was related to some Reg Ellis's wife, for those of you that remember Reg Ellis, who was on the fire department. She was his wife, and the new room was dedicated to her. In 2011, we had more flooding. And of course, now it's about 3 feet of flooding. And really, here are some photos of how the library looked when they first came back in. Mr. Ferris was still okay, but he's still hanging up there, which is fine. So everything was tossed. All of that was thrown out. A lot of books were lost. But here's the same room after it was reopened. Most of you remember that the library moved into the Insulaco Shopping Center, into one of the empty storefronts, and they were there for quite a while until the work was done on the library. But one of the fun things about the restoration of this building during 2011 was that they pulled down the drop ceiling and found that wonderful old tin ceiling, probably from, the original building, still hanging up there in that room. So that was a really nice discovery. So there are sometimes good things that happen too. And again, the major force has been the library friends helping out. I guess they're probably the descendants of the library ladies that they were saying were needed back in the early part of the century. But the library friends have been helpful in keeping things going and getting books organized and whatnot. And I believe they help with the basket auction as well. So now the library is a thriving community, and it's not just for books anymore. The library does so many other things at this point. There are numerous adult programs, many programs for children. The murder mystery events I know are very popular. There's arts and crafts, again, not just for kids, but for adults. There's computer access. One of my favorite things is the cloud library, so you can download books onto your laptop or your Kindle or iPad or whatever. So if you prefer digital books or digital reading, that's an option for you as well. And the library has since purchased the Trinity Church Rectory building on Montgomery Avenue, along with the empty lot next to it and the parking lot. And hopefully in the future, they will be moving out of here into something over in that area and expanding. So that's a brief history. When I was a kid, I would come here all the time. I mean, I grew up coming to this library, and from the time I could start, I would come here before I could read, and my mom would bring me. But as soon as I could read, we started. You go home with an armful of books, and I know many of you have some similar types of memories. It was just the place to come. We came here, we studied here. Does anyone have a question or want to make a comment about?
Yeah, question. You said earlier that they started with 2 shelves
In Pittston.
Yes, in Pittston, and then they had 1,000 books.
Mm-hmm.
Where did the books come from? Were they donated? Was it money they got and then they bought the books?
Yeah, both.
Okay.
Sometimes people would donate them, and you know how that goes. When people are donating books, sometimes you get ones that are great and maybe some that are not so good. But they needed books, so they would take pretty much anything they could get their hands on at that point. But yeah, it was again a community effort, and I think once they went into that building over there by the bridge, it was more accessible. They didn't have to walk all the way over town to get their books, and I think it was a little bit easier for everyone.
As a result of the flood, did they happen to have insurance on the building at that time?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure they did. I know that when Anne Bramblett Barr, who was the librarian at the time, when she came back in here, they took as many of the valuable things as they could gather together, including a lot of the books, and they put them in the freezer. They found, I forget where the freezer space was. Do you remember that, Ken? Yeah, I know you weren't here then, but
I think actually in Ann's basement.
somehow, where was it?
Actually in Ann's basement.
Oh, okay.
We bought a chest freezer.
Oh, okay, so they bought a
Stored
chest freezer,
A lot of the valuable.
put the valuable stuff in the freezer, because that's how you preserve things that have been water damaged until you can restore them. And then part of FEMA's work here in the borough was to provide restoration for some of the valuable things, the historical things. There are a number of maps, old photos, papers that were very, very badly damaged. And they sent them all out, restored them. They sent back the originals, but then they also sent back digital images of everything that was restored.
Two Wallen prints.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a lot, and it took a while, but here we are. and I will encourage you to support the library in any way you can. I know they have the Sabatini's fundraiser coming up in October. There's gift baskets back here if you want to take some chances on those. But it's a worthy institution, and they do so much for the kids in the borough. Pardon me? So in any case,
What's the book volume now,
do you know that?
No, it's tough to gauge because we share our collection with the whole district. But I'm assuming it's up in like the 20,000s, the whole collection. That's just in this building.
Mm-hmm.
Also, in addition to the Cloud Library, there's a Cloud
Oh, that
newsstand.
yeah,
The newsstand where you can borrow any periodical you can think of.
right. And what is that new thing coming out with the movies?
Canopy.
Canopy.
So
I
there's
couldn't
TV
remember
shows
the
and
name of it.
movies on Canopy you get with your library card, and we also have online crafting classes. So basic through Creative Bug.
There are so many things your card will do. You can go onto the Oosterhout Library website and use your West Pittston Library card to access the old Pittston Gazettes, to access, I think there's Sunday Independence on there, and a number of other things as well.
Kenner does a large number of adult programs,
Right.
and many of them are on YouTube and.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they also have a YouTube channel that has some interesting programming on it that's worth
If you
looking
go
at.
back, one of the neatest things they did in the past was a reading of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol.
Yes.
And I know Kendra was in costume.
You're in costume for a lot of times. I think that's part of working here is costuming. I'd like to thank Representative Hudak for being here tonight. I appreciate it. And anybody else have a question, I would be happy to, or even a memory that you would like to share.
And when they bought the Trinity
Mhm.
parsonage, did the church go with that, or?
No, the church is still being used by the church. Yeah.
So-
It's just the rectory building that they no longer had a need for it, and it was costing money to. So it's a beautiful building, and it's in very much original condition. So, we're
So
hoping.
they're waiting on funds to recondition.
Things
that
are,
into
well, do you want to address that, Bill? Do you have anything to say about that?
Send money. No, it's gonna be quite a project. It'll take several years to accomplish. But it's gonna be about retrofitting the manse and possibly the expansion with another building.
Mhm.
Libraries, as you know, are as much programming centers as they are repositories for books. And I think we're probably at the forefront of the programming. Through the 2011 fund. Now, Kendra, I don't think you were here yet then, but we've really done a tremendous amount of programming.
It's incredible.
In fact, I believe we financed that cloud library in its entirety shortly after, with a donation from the West Pittston Library.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
a generous donation. And there's a lot of good things happening. Hopefully
Bill is on the
past-
library board, for those of you that
Yeah.
aren't aware.
And so is Ellen.
Oh, and Ellen, right, Ellen's on the board as well.
Ellen's also on
Mhm.
the board. And it seems like a lifetime sentence to me, but
A lot of years, I know.
yeah, a lot of years, and I'm fading away little by little, but I'll always be, as I told everybody, I'll always be here for the library.
I
Because it meant
think,
so much to me, is, you talked about coming here to get an armful of books. Mrs. Simons, who I believe was the one.
yes, at that desk there.
Was a wise enough lady to keep my library card in the circulation desk, because she knew I never had it with me. And to have to go home and get it and check a book out.
Yep,
But,
yep, and they had those stacks of cards right in the desk.
yeah. And
Um,
as you can see, we no longer have the card catalogs that many people knew and looked at. We have a bank of computers over here to search.
That had, the card
And
catalogs
that
have
runs through the
disappeared.
county system, and we can borrow virtually any book that's within the county system and have it for you. And what would you say, Kendra, at least a week if it's available?
Yeah, usually less than a week, and we can actually, we request books from the entire state is an option
Yeah.
if we don't have it here in the county. And then I've requested books from California, Alabama, the whole country if we don't have it, so. There's very few books that I can't get my hands on. I've come
Wow.
across one or two, but I'm very persistent, so.
That's amazing,
If
that's
you need it, we can
amazing.
get it.
I mean, it's just an incredible resource, and I know after the 2011 flood, it was one of the things that was kind of bonding people back together again. I think once the library opened, it was like, oh, okay, so things are
Yeah.
getting back to normal.
And at one point, we almost did end up in the Stark building,
Right,
but the flood kind of threw a wrench to the works there, and
there was actually discussion, I came across this, I didn't include it in the program, but I will tell you, there was actually a discussion at one point that the library, that building that for the Legion and everybody, instead of building it where they built it on Linden Street, it would be built at the back of the cemetery, the Jenkins Cemetery. And if they had to move some graves, it would be okay.
Yeah. There's a lot of graves that have been moved since that. I used to say that's a whole other program.
Yeah, that was, but, does anyone else have a story they would like to share? Library memories?
I grew up in Philadelphia.
Right.
But I have a memory of getting my first library card. And it was a big deal.
Yeah, sure,
And
you
when you
found-
were old enough to get the library card, and we lived outside of Philadelphia,
Mhm.
but this, our little shopping center started a library, and it was close enough to walk to. And it was a big deal to get a library card.
It's that liberating feeling,
Yeah.
almost like your
Yeah.
driver's license.
Yeah, it was like you were a big person. Now you got to go in and pick out a book, and
On a
yeah.
much smaller scale, you know, I think it speaks to our community, and, you know, we talked about our little reading, our community.
Mhm.
There's maybe 3 or 4, read it and return it book stands. I think one is down here at the barbecue place, there was one on Philadelphia Avenue,
Right.
and, people just share their wealth.
Mm-hmm.
of books.
It's
They're fun
really
books.
quite nice. It's
Yeah.
really quite nice.
The library's always stood out in the community, a lot of great affairs,
Mm-hmm.
to offer to people.
Now,
Any service you can think of. Advisory services for folks at tax time, assistance or guidance there.
learning
You know,
people,
we've had programs on IRAs, and virtually all of them for free.
and for folks who need help
Yeah.
with computers,
Yeah.
they can,
Yeah,
you know, I know you've had classes
Great
on that.
selection of computers. And
Uh,
the one thing that I'm looking forward to most in my 35 years as a board member is we're gonna finally have a program on Bigfoot. Because I believe there's a Bigfoot roaming around out there somewhere.
Well, that's
Is that Stanley,
fantastic.
sir?
Maybe, I don't, it's the Pennsylvania Bigfoot, investigating, maybe, you can- that, there might be a small charge for that program. And that's right.
That one's free.
That one's free,
Please come.
yeah.
Now, I gotta
That's
ask,
good.
because my neighbor is he's written books on our local Bigfoot, Stanley Zurich.
Mm.
So you have a interesting gentleman right in Susquehanna that has written books on.
Oh, is he the one that
Susquehanna.
wrote the Susquehanna Screamer?
Yes.
Yeah, I've read that. That's a good one too.
We also have
And
Max
he's big
Furyk
into
is
it.
coming this Thursday, and he's gonna talk a little bit about the Smurl House, in case anyone knows.
Yeah.
That's timely now.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should recognize our state representative,
Yeah,
Mr.
we-
Haddock, Jim Haddock, and he's offered his services to both the Historical Society and the library
Absolutely.
faithfully.
And we're incredibly grateful. We've only been around for, this is like our 23rd year, but ever since we were founded, we've kind of been
I've been in government.
with the library.
I've been in government for many, many years in addition to the board services, but this is the first time we've had.
Absolutely, you're the first
showing up for
official to
one of our
come.
programs. Like I said, thank you for that.
So, congratulations.
I would just like to add that Representative Haddock was very instrumental in bringing 2 LSA grants to West Pittston.
Absolutely.
A state LSA
Mhm.
grant and a county, and we're most appreciative of Representative Haddock. So thank
Yes, and those are for bridge construction, I believe.
you. No,
No?
they're for different.
Different community
rural
needs, okay.
building and- Yes.
Awesome, thank you for working on that for us. Yes.
If I could, because it's obviously having or sometimes it's not as obvious, so I shouldn't use that adjective. But it's an important part of I feel, of a community to have a library within its midst. And in the state of Pennsylvania last year, so you realize there is an appropriation in the budget for the library system throughout we talked about throughout the state of Pennsylvania. And last year there was a 10% increase to the line item. And as we were going through the budget processes, you know, everybody has an avocation, and they come and they sit with the state representatives. And I had a meeting with the state association, and they came in, and I thanked them at the end of the presentation, because they said, I know it's a big state, but we got such an increase last year. Our only request this year is that you keep our funding at the same level. So the Library Association, much to their credit, didn't come in and say, hey, we need more.
Right,
Now, obviously, they said we'd like to have more, but they said, please don't take
cut it.
away.
Mhm.
So they realize we all have the financial obligations, and they weren't just with the proverbial, you know, give us more money.
Mhm,
Use it as most good organizations, but you know, so the library being here in West Pittston, John R. Reed, Attorney Reed, was a cousin of our family,
Mhm.
and Joseph, young John. I grew up here in West Pittston, and John was their dad was a big supporter of the library. His children used this library, and I heard many stories through the years. And I know my family was proud to back this library.
Mrs. Reap was my librarian in high school, so so I know that her dedication was definitely in that area.
Thank you for your support.
Absolutely.
I
So,
enjoyed
you know,
the presentation.
you can see our borough founding fathers saw the importance of a library system. And I will add, and most of you probably know this, but this Pittston Library Association is the oldest library in the county. So, you know, they were well ahead of the game when they were proposing this back in 1873.
And what year did Pittston?
That was, I'm trying to think, it was sometime in the mid-1920s, maybe 1930s, I believe. Yeah. And that started, I think, in the town hall, I think.
This house for many years until it moved to the current location.
Yeah, it was right in the town hall, right? Yeah.
It's got quite a beautiful library also.
I will say I'm originally from upstate New York. When we moved, we were looking down here in the Scranton area, and my only requirement when we were looking at a house, I had no other requirements, had never been to the Scranton area before at all, was within walking distance of a library. And I found a house 2 blocks away and was here enough that they were like, we might as well pay her, she's here. And 7 years later, I'm still here. So it's definitely an integral part of my life, obviously, but it was really important when we moved here. My son was 2 at the time, and they've all watched him grow up. So
Yeah.
it was important. And I've loved learning. Mary has taught me so much as an out-of-towner. I know nothing, and I've learned so much from every.
She's a very willing audience, so
I love
anybody
it,
that'll
so.
listen to me, I'm happy to.
I love gossip from like 1930. That's totally what I'm here for. So
Absolutely.
She also walks to our borough building every day.
yeah,
She's
that's
our secretary now.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, I thank you for coming out. It's been fantastic to have you here. And it's nice to see a large crowd. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Mary.
Yes, thank